That was President Biden from the Oval with some lovely pictures of his family behind him. Very Biden-y speech. Back with me, Alex Wagner, Lawrence O'Donnell, Stephanie Ruhle, and Chris Hayes. Alex, I'm going to go to you first. So he opens with bipartisanship and closes with bipartisanship, but he sandwiches in the little hits at Republicans and what they refuse to go along with in the middle. What did you make of the speech?
Sorry, did you say me, Joy?
Yeah, to Alex.
Oh, okay, sorry. Happy to talk. You know, I think that he recalled that moment in the State of the Union, rightfully so, when he basically outed or shamed Republicans on their potential, their appetite to cut social safety net programs, and in so doing is trying to burnish his resume as protector in chief. Right? This was a set of remarks that were yes about bipartisanship, yes the case for the Biden economy, but also Biden as a leader, someone who cares about the American people, and in that he's outlining the way in which he's trying to protect the most vulnerable in society by protecting Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, and drawing a contrast with the Republican Party, which had its knives out for those programs at the outset of this year, right? And I think that's an important case he needs to make, given the strength for keeping those programs intact that we've seen across this country. I mean, even the GOP's position on this has changed. This is not, you can't talk about slashing social safety net programs publicly as a Republican candidate in the same way that you used to be able to, right? It is becoming increasingly the third rail in American politics. And so Biden was very much using that as a case for his own candidacy in 2024, which he alluded to towards the end of those remarks.
Did it surprise you that he didn't go to some of the other sort of fiscal ideas that, you know, appeal to younger voters, things like student loan debt relief? He's in court fighting right now about whether or not student loan forgiveness can happen. He really was leaning on the very sort of bedrock, you know, Democratic policy ideas, Medicare, Social Security, defending those. Did that surprise you?
Well, I think his nod to younger voters was especially the climate stuff, which they are very animated by, rightfully so, is the existential issue facing all of us, this planet. But, you know, I think part of it is the student loan program is a court issue to a large degree, right? And there's only so much he can do to control that. So he knows that climate matters. He touted that a lot in the way in which his key climate provisions were preserved as a result of these negotiations. And I think that's his hat tip to young voters. But I think you're right, Joy. Largely, the case is being made to the mythic swing independent voters who are the kind of people who are going to tune in to an Oval Office address and may not have been following the sausage making in Washington, D.C. that's unfolded over the course of the last couple of weeks.
And Stephanie Ruhle, he did a long stretch here, like sort of laying out the fiscal consequences of not doing what was just done, right? And I mean, it's weird because it's kind of hard after President Obama and Donald Trump to get used to a low caffeinated president, right? A decaf version of the president. So he's very calm in his delivery, but he was delivering some actual facts on what we risked had we not gone ahead and done this deal. There's a Politico article here that says that Fitch actually might still downgrade the U.S. Our credit rating, and they say this is why. U.S. policymakers have risked damaging the economy's otherwise strong fundamentals thanks to a steady deterioration in governance over the last 15 years, per the Fitch statement. Increased political polarization and partisanship as witnessed by the contested 2020 election, repeated brinksmanship over the debt limit, and failure to tackle fiscal challenges from growing mandatory spending has led to rising fiscal deficits. In other words, the fight Republicans just keep bringing to Democratic presidents might be the thing that ends up threatening us, even though Biden got this deal.
Without a doubt. And I would say the most important thing that he said was not every side got what they wanted, but America got what it needed. Right? This shouldn't be a giant achievement. We should never be in a scenario where the United States could default. Every citizen relies on our rating. The world economy does. And he was very careful, and he gave a compliment to Kevin McCarthy because from his perspective, as the person who ran on saying, I am going to be the bipartisan president, and everyone laughed at him, given how polarized things are. But this isn't the only bipartisan thing that got done. There's been gun safety measures, obviously the infrastructure law, and that is his signature. And he was careful in the last 2 weeks. You did not see this White House leaking much. You didn't see them talking about Kevin McCarthy because you can't dunk on a guy and then expect him to come to the table. And he did come to the table. And there's a zillion terrible things we can say about Kevin McCarthy, but this thing did get over the line, and America needed that.
Yeah, and I think, Joy, just one of the things that's weird about this moment, right? And I think, in the speech, I think he's mostly doing, here's what the Biden domestic policy agenda has been, which we should note is kind of a 60-40 agenda in the polling, right? The stuff he's touting, and part of the reason I think Democrats did so well in 2022 is that just the substance of the domestic policy agenda has been popular. Wasn't the case, for instance, with the ACA, I think rightly or wrongly, but the other thing that's so frustrating about this is there's a difference between the process and the outcome. It's a little like, it's like when a basketball player chucks a ball from 32 feet with tons of time on the shot clock left and it goes in. You're like, all right, well, you made the shot. In this case, the outcome is fine. It doesn't look that different from a normal budget deal. And in that respect, I think it's a decent deal. The process is nuts. Yeah. And the idea that we're just teeing up another one of these processes for 2025, that to me is the bigger issue here.
That's what Fitch is saying.
Yes, exactly.
That's why Fitch is like,
we
you guys.
are not doing that at all. This is the deal where, and Wall Street, by the way, is relentlessly stupid about the affairs of Wall Street, about the affairs of Washington, and they still are, because with this deal, you should upgrade this debt, because it turns out everyone in the Republican House of Representatives who we suspected was insane enough to default on the debt, they didn't mean a word of it, never, ever. And they all went along with this, including the Chip Roy posers who voted against it. They all wanted to not default on the debt. There's not one of them who was in favor of defaulting on the debt. We didn't know that a month ago. We didn't know that 6 months ago. And so if you're really watching this from Wall Street, you should say, wow, this debt is way more solid than we thought it was. It's all just a phony pose by Republicans.
That's also why the markets didn't blink, right? We all sat here and covered every word and everything Chip Roy said.
But I'm just responding to this notion that this might be a reason to downgrade, and it would be ridiculous.
But Kevin McCarthy clearly winked at Wall Street 5 weeks ago when he went down to the New York Stock Exchange and basically said, boys and girls, we got this.
Well, there's also, the thing about this, again, is that what happened was it transformed into a normal budget negotiation.
Exactly.
And partly it transformed.
One we've seen
and partly it transformed because Biden went out and said, we're not negotiating about this. We all agree that that's going to be. Kevin McCarthy went to Wall Street. I still think, as just a matter of sound engineering, that leaving this thing lying around like Chekhov's gun to go off at a future point is just ridiculous. Get rid of the debt ceiling. You appropriate and spend the money, and you create the amount of debt when you pass the bills. The president signs them. Get rid of the limit.
And by the way,
I think Biden made the best case for that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alice. I think Biden made the best case for that tonight. For normal politics.
If you do read the reporting on how this deal came together, there was concern in the White House up until several days beforehand. There was a legitimate examination of the 14th Amendment, by the way, which I don't think is entirely off the table, working it through the courts to see if it could be a way to get the debt ceiling off as a legislative cudgel, and concern up until 3 or 4 or 5 days in advance of, when we got a deal that they wasn't going to come together. And in that way, it's absurd that this is what you need to have hanging over your head to get a normal budget deal done.
But to Lawrence's point, which I think is also one of the great lessons here, and it is a credit to Kevin McCarthy, honestly, and a credit to Joe Biden, is it became clear pretty early on McCarthy wasn't going to shoot the hostage. Right. That he just wasn't going to do it. And once that happens, I had a very wise person once say to me, you cannot invent leverage you don't have in a negotiation. That's the whole pretense of the debt ceiling, was to invent leverage you don't have. We only have one part of government, but we're going to get everything we want, because if we don't, we'll blow up the economy. And once it becomes clear that that's not actually a credible threat, the leverage goes away. And the idea that you could bootstrap this magical leverage to get everything you want in divided government also goes away.
This sentence that we heard from the president, I commend Speaker McCarthy. Just imagine the 4 years of the Trump presidency. Imagine a sentence that begins with, I commend the speaker. It's inconceivable. And that line, I think, to the average viewer of this is the most important line, because you're either with Biden on these policies before he opens his mouth, or halfway with him on these policies before he opens his mouth, or you're not. But on human decency, there is no comparison between the front runner for the Republican nomination and the person who just spoke, who will be the Democratic nominee. That's the kind of language that voter in the middle likes to hear, has lived with most of their lives with previous presidents, and it's back. That basic human decency was back in the heart of that message.